The movie starts with a live band playing at a cozy cafe on an island called Island. The cafe is owned by a man named Alvarez, who is immediately taken with the band's lead singer, Nora. He invites her to join him at his table and praises her beauty and amazing voice. He's so impressed that he offers her a special deal, a 1-year contract to perform at the cafe every Saturday night, with 3 times the usual pay. Nora, thrilled by the offer, happily agrees. Not long after, Alvarez asks a bartender to bring Nora some wine. But in a clumsy accident, the bartender spills the wine all over her dress. Nora, trying to stay calm, says she can change and it's no big deal. However, Alvarez is furious. He's hosting an important guest and doesn't want them to see someone with a ruined dress. In a shocking move, Alvarez kills the bartender right in front of Nora. She is horrified and terrified, realizing that Alvarez is not just a nice cafe owner. He is a ruthless and dangerous person. As the story unfolds, we learn that Alvarez is actually the leader of a powerful American mafia, and he's been living on the island for 4 years, building his illegal empire. Next, the scene shifts to Los Angeles, where we meet Mark, a police chief, and his partner, Phil. The two are undercover, pretending to be criminals while they plan a deal at the airport. Soon enough, the real criminals show up. Mark steps forward to grab the illegal goods, while Phil is ready to exchange the money. But suddenly, Phil surprises everyone by attacking one of the dealer's henchmen, and a wild fight breaks out. In the middle of the chaos, Mark's phone rings. It's his mom, calling from their hometown. She tells him that his brother has been found dead. Mark is shaken by the news and immediately rushes back to his hometown, which, as it turns out, is on the same island where he had met Alvarez. Soon after, Mark arrives on the island and attends his brother's funeral. It's a heartbreaking moment when he learns that his little brother was the bartender who had been killed by Alvarez just days before. Mark's mother is completely devastated by the loss of her youngest child. There are whispers among the people that Mark's brother may have been murdered by gangsters as he was heading home from work. To Mark's shock, Alvarez and his 2 henchmen appear at the funeral to offer their condolences. After the funeral, Mark and his mom return home. As Mark looks through old pictures of him and his brother, he realizes that it has been 11 years since he last visited the island. His job as a police chief had kept him away for so long. With a heavy heart, Mark makes a silent vow to find the person responsible for his brother's death and take revenge. The next day, Mark goes to the island's police station. He heads straight to the office of the police chief, who turns out to be his childhood friend B. The two share a warm and familiar greeting, showing how close they were. B expresses his sympathy for Mark's loss and promises to begin an investigation right away. Mark asks if there are any clues about who might have killed his brother. B explains that they know the killers are from a gang, but with so many gangs on the island, it will take time to figure out which one is responsible. While at the station, Mark runs into Aquila, a martial arts instructor. To his surprise, she's also his ex-girlfriend. After 11 years, she's clearly happy to see him again. They talk for a while, with Aquila offering her condolences for his brother's death. Mark asks her if she knows anything about his brother's routine and which gang might be involved in the murder. Aquila told Mark that she wasn't sure which gang was responsible because many new gangs had arrived after Mark left the island. However, she did know that Mark's younger brother worked with an American man named Alvarez. She shared that Alvarez was not just a simple cafe owner. He was actually the leader of a dangerous mafia. The cafes he owned were just a cover for his real business, which involved illegal weapons and goods. When Mark heard this, he became suspicious of Alvarez and decided he needed to confront him directly. Before Mark left, he asked Aquila to take care of his mother and make sure she got home safely, worried that she might be in danger. Soon after, Mark went to Alvarez's cafe. As he arrived, Alvarez's right-hand man tried to stop him, but Alvarez himself stepped in and allowed Mark to enter. Without wasting any time, Mark asked Alvarez straight away if he knew who was behind his brother's death. Alvarez quickly came up with a story, claiming that Mark's brother was killed by strangers while returning home from a late shift. Mark didn't buy it, and with a firm voice, he warned Alvarez that he would never forgive him if he was involved in the murder. Alvarez just laughed and brushed off Mark's threats, clearly not worried since Mark was just a regular police officer. Then, Alvarez casually gave Mark the location of a cafe where gangsters often gathered. He suggested that Mark ask the gangsters there, as they might know who was behind his brother's death. As Mark left, Alvarez quietly ordered his right-hand man to gather gangsters from the north and take care of Mark that very night. Meanwhile, Mark stopped by to visit his best friend, who ran a hot dog stand. He asked about some weapons he had left with him. His friend explained that the weapons were hidden in an empty building near the beach, buried for safekeeping. As the story unfolded, it became clear that when Mark and his best friend were teenagers, they were like leaders on the island. They had the respect of everyone around them. But after Mark left for Los Angeles, the island began to attract dangerous foreign gangs and mafia groups who were hungry for power and control. Mark's best friend understood that Mark would be determined to seek revenge for his brother's death. Knowing this, he promised to help Mark whenever he needed it. After their conversation, Mark went to a secluded building near the beach. There, he dug up the weapons his best friend had hidden for him, preparing for the next step in his mission. As night fell, Mark made his way to the cafe that Alvarez had mentioned. He entered, immediately turning off the loud music, and walked straight up to the gangsters sitting there. He demanded to know who was responsible for his brother's death. The gangsters didn't take kindly to his accusation. They attacked him, and a brutal fight broke out. But Mark, using all his strength and skill, was able to fight them off and subdue them. Once the gangsters were down, Mark again asked who had killed his brother. The gang leader firmly denied any involvement in the crime, claiming they didn't harm locals. Just as Mark was about to push further, a group of gangsters from the north, sent by Alvarez, burst into the cafe, guns in hand. They opened fire on Mark. Thankfully, Mark managed to dodge the bullets and narrowly escaped the gunfire. What followed was a tense chase through the streets. During the pursuit, Mark was able to take down one of the attackers, and eventually, he found a place to hide. The gangsters searched for him, but he managed to stay out of sight long enough for them to lose his trail. Soon after, the gang leader called Alvarez to report that they had lost track of Mark. Alvarez, furious, ordered his gang to take a different approach, eliminate Mark's mother. Back at Mark's house, the gang arrived and barged in, expecting to find Mark's mother asleep in bed. They fired at what they thought was her, but when they got closer, they realized it was just a pillow. Aquila, Mark's ex-girlfriend, had taken the necessary precautions to protect his mother, and she had swapped the pillow for her. Later, Mark and B, the police chief, arrive at Mark's house to examine the crime scene. As they look around, Mark can't shake the thought that if he hadn't trusted Aquila to protect his mother, she could have been the one attacked. Just then, B tells Mark that he's received some new information from his informant about his brother's murder. B explains that there was a witness to the crime, a female singer named Nora. He goes on to tell Mark that Nora lives at a motel near the church, in room number 18. B suggests that Mark go and speak to Nora directly to learn more about who killed his brother. The next day, Mark heads to the motel to find Nora. When he arrives at her room, Nora hesitates to open the door. She's worried that Mark might be one of Alvarez's men sent to harm her. Mark quickly shows her his police badge, reassuring her that he's not a threat. Relieved, Nora opens the door and they begin to talk. Mark promises Nora that he'll help her escape the island safely if she agrees to tell him the truth about who killed the bartender, who he now knows was his younger brother. Nervously, Nora confesses that Alvarez killed Mark's brother, all because he accidentally spilled wine on her dress. She explains that she's been trapped on the island ever since because Alvarez fears she might go to the police with what she knows. Shocked by the truth, Mark quickly helps Nora leave her room. He then meets up with B and asks him to take Nora to the pier, ensuring she gets off the island without any trouble. B agrees and drives Nora to the pier, while Mark begins planning how he will take revenge on Alvarez for his brother's death. Meanwhile, Alvarez is making his own plans. He orders his mercenaries to track down Mark and bring him in. A few hours later, the mercenaries arrive on the island and head straight to Mark's house, determined to find him. Meanwhile, Mark, his mother, and Aquila are at Mark's house. Mark has made a plan to leave his mother in Aquila's care while he prepares to confront Alvarez. Just as they're getting ready, the sound of a car pulling up breaks the silence. It's the team of mercenaries Alvarez sent to find Mark. In a hurry, Mark grabs a weapon and quickly leads his mother and Aquila to the back of the house for safety. Two of the mercenaries stay near the car while the other two move inside the house. As they search, the mercenaries notice signs that Mark may have gone out the back. They immediately head out in pursuit. Mark tries to stay one step ahead, but the two mercenaries catch up to him. A gunfight breaks out between them, Meanwhile, the other two mercenaries guarding the car spot B. A fierce shootout ensues, but B manages to drive them off and escape without being hurt. Back with Mark, he's still trying to fight off one of the mercenaries, while the other manages to slip away. Mark then gets a call from B, checking in on his location. Mark tells B that he's now with his mother and Aquila, hiding out at his best friend's house, the one who runs the hot dog stand. The scene then shifts to Alvarez and his right-hand man. They're in a hotel room, looking for Nora. Alvarez's anger grows when he realizes that Nora is missing. In a fit of rage, he shoots and kills the hotel guard, blaming him for not protecting Nora. On the other hand, Mark arrives at his best friend's place, determined to leave his mother and Aquila in safety while he goes after Alvarez to seek revenge for his brother's death. His best friend, the hot dog seller, greets Mark's mother and Aquila warmly, but as Mark is about to leave, Aquila insists on coming with him. Mark tries to stop her, worried about her safety, but Aquila is determined. After a brief argument, they decide to face this danger together. Later that evening, Mark and Aquila wait for Chief of Police B to arrive. They've made a plan to confront Alvarez together. Soon, B's car pulls up, but to their surprise, B doesn't get out. Concerned, Mark and Aquila rush to check on him. To their horror, they find B badly wounded. Before they can react, gunfire rings out as Alvarez's remaining mercenaries launch an attack. In the chaos, the mercenaries manage to capture Aquila while Mark desperately tries to help the dying B. As B struggles to stay conscious, he urges Mark to keep fighting for justice and to protect the island from criminals like Alvarez. With his last breath, B encourages Mark to save the island from the hands of these ruthless people. The next morning, the local church is filled with people attending a service. Mark arrives and stands before the congregation, his voice full of passion. He speaks to the people, rallying them against the oppression they've been suffering at the hands of outsiders. He tells them about Alvarez, the man behind the criminal activities that have hurt their island. Mark reminds them that this fight is not just about his brother's death, but also for B, their beloved police chief, and Aquila, who has been kidnapped. His words move the people, and they agree to stand with him against Alvarez. After the meeting, Mark heads to the police station, where he now steps in as the acting chief of police, taking over from B. He gathers the officers and tells them that their new mission is to take down Alvarez. As he works on gathering information about Alvarez's operations, he is interrupted by a visit from his old partner, Phil, who had come from Los Angeles. Phil had come to find Mark on purpose because he was worried about Mark's long absence from Los Angeles. When they finally spoke, Mark explained that he wouldn't return until he had dealt with Alvarez, the man who killed his brother and was holding Aquila hostage. Phil, understanding the gravity of the situation, immediately offered his help, treating Mark's problem as his own. Later that afternoon, Mark received a call from Alvarez. It seemed Alvarez had figured out that Mark was behind Nora's escape. Alvarez then made a proposal. They would meet at 7 a.m. the next day for an exchange, Nora for Aquila. He promised that after the exchange, he would leave Mark alone, as long as Mark agreed to forget everything Alvarez had done. Mark didn't want to accept, but he reluctantly agreed to the terms. Deep down, though, he knew he could never forgive Alvarez, not until he had taken his revenge. On top of that, Nora had already left the island, so Mark couldn't bring her to the exchange the next morning, making the situation even more complicated. After the call, Mark immediately contacted Phil and asked him to gather a team with the local police. He made Phil the leader of the operation to rescue Aquila during the meeting with Alvarez the following morning. Phil agreed without hesitation, ready to follow Mark's plan and do whatever it took to help. The next day, Mark stood nervously at the meeting spot, waiting for Alvarez. Meanwhile, Phil and his team of local police officers were sneaking into Alvarez's headquarters to rescue Aquila. They were almost immediately confronted by one of Alvarez's mercenaries, but Phil acted quickly, taking down the threat with ease. Back at the meeting point, Mark finally came face to face with Alvarez and one of his trusted men. Without wasting any time, Alvarez demanded to know where Nora was. Mark, trying to buy some time, lied and said that Nora would show up once Aquila arrived. He kept his focus on waiting for updates from Phil, who was in the middle of rescuing Aquila. Meanwhile, Phil had found Aquila, but he was now facing a mercenary who had him at gunpoint. With no way out, Phil had no choice but to surrender. Thankfully, his team eventually managed to take out the mercenaries, and they were able to free Aquila. Phil wasted no time in calling Mark to let him know Aquila was safe with him. Hearing this, Mark reassured him that Nora was safe in Los Angeles and would not be coming back to the island. However, Alvarez then threatened to harm Aquila unless Mark did as he was told. Mark, speaking calmly, told Alvarez that his henchmen were no longer a threat. His team had taken care of them. Furious, Alvarez ordered his right-hand man to shoot Mark. But Mark was quicker, disarming and incapacitating Alvarez's man with expert skill. Just when it seemed like things were about to take a terrible turn, something unexpected happened. Out of nowhere, the hot dog seller and the island locals appeared, surrounding Alvarez and his men, all of them armed and ready for a fight. Mark quickly raised his hands and urged everyone to lower their weapons. He proposed a solution, a duel between him and Alvarez to settle things once and for all. After a moment of hesitation, Alvarez reluctantly agreed to the challenge. Without wasting any more time, the duel began. Mark, with fierce determination, replicated the exact move that Alvarez had used to kill his younger brother. The scene shifted to Mark and Aquila, now alone on the beach. They shared a quiet, intimate moment, their bond clearly stronger than ever. It was obvious they were officially back together and planning to marry soon. Soon after, Phil invited Mark to return to Los Angeles with him. But Mark declined, explaining that he felt a deep responsibility to stay and protect the island from outsiders who might try to take control. And with that, the film ends. So the moral of the story is if your mom's in danger, it's probably a good idea to let your ex-girlfriend protect her while you go on a revenge mission. Just saying, protect her while you go on a revenge mission.